Page 190 of The Unfolding is the story of Nikki Davis.
I had plans, but as we know, God has his plans. We have our vision board and God has his vision board. You see this car, you see this house, you see this money, I want in my account this year. This is my vision board. And God is literally ripping that vision board up and saying, we're rewriting all of that.
God's story has been unfolding.
Since the beginning of time.
He invites you to be a part of it.
Another page in The Unfolding.
Hi, this is Meredith Foster. Nikki Davis discovered her passion for hip-hop radio when she was in college. She was good at it, she loved it, and she couldn't imagine ever doing anything else. But a series of failed relationships and jobs that just didn't satisfy made it clear she was longing for more. And then she started growing in her relationship with Jesus. Her life and priorities changed, and Nikki realized she couldn't stay in a job where she was promoting negative things. But how could she walk away from the safety and security of a job that she once thought she would do for the rest of her life?
So as a kid, I was very much in church. I was in the choir. I was on the usher board. I was a volunteer at the Christian Help Center. And my mother had me in dance class from the time I was about 5 to maybe 17 till I graduated high school.
Wow.
And so that's all I really knew was God and dance. As I started to venture out and figure out where I wanted to go to college, I applied to numerous colleges, but the one that I really wanted to go to was in Roanoke, Virginia. I believe it was called Hollins University, and it was a dance school. And I wanted to really get in, and I got the letter back that said I didn't get in. My dream was to be a dance choreographer and open a dance studio in my hometown for all the little girls that didn't have anything to do like me when they were younger, because I am from a very small town in North Carolina. It's called Roxborough, and it has 13 stoplights. So that was my dream. I wanted to be a dancer. And so I didn't get into that school. I did, however, get accepted into 3 other schools. One of them was Winston-Salem State University, and I ended up picking that. As I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, I didn't know. I really didn't know, because I felt like my dream had been kind of crushed.
Were there any conversations with God, like, what do you think you're doing here? Because this is what I've been training for since I was 5 years old.
No, not at all.
Really?
I never had that conversation. I don't know if I prayed about it. I may have, as a 17-year-old, I might have said, oh, God, please let me get into this school. I really want to go to this school. And that was kind of the gist of the prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Very different from my prayer life today. It's very intentional. My mother, I had done a lot of speaking in church. She would always have me go up to the front to say scripture. And so when I got accepted into Winston-Salem State, my mom says, well, why don't you just do communications? You like to talk. Just do communications. And I said, okay, do I have to take a math class? And they said no. I said, sign me up. I ended up majoring in radio and television. Around my maybe junior year, my teacher told all of us to get an internship. And I have a cousin that is a news reporter in Roanoke, Virginia. She put in a few good words for me, and she got me hooked up with the program director at a radio station there. It was a R&B station. And so I kept calling him every day. Like, I really want this internship. I had no idea what a radio internship was about. I just knew I needed it. So he finally said, yeah, let's get you going. And my cousin let me move in with her for the summer. My first job was to clean out the emails. I sat there literally for 2 weeks just cleaning emails. And so the midday personality, he walks by the door and he stops and he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm just cleaning emails. And he was like, no, come with me and let me show you some real things, because we can't have you just cleaning emails your whole summer. The PD there, his name was Walt, and he was just the nicest guy ever. And the midday guy, his name was CC, Charles Mitchell. And he took me in the production studio. I still knew nothing about radio, didn't know how to produce a commercial, didn't know how to cut the mic on, knew nothing about it. I just knew I was there. And so he sat me in the production room and he showed me a few little tips and little tricks, showed me how to turn the microphone on, showed me how to record my voice into what was Cool Edit at the time. He showed me where to get sound effects and music and said, here, voice this, put some music behind it, and let me hear what you come up with. So that was my introduction to radio. after that, I just fell in love. I never wanted to leave that studio. I just kept voicing stuff and putting music to it and sound effects. And it was just like the greatest thing ever. And the internship was really dope in the sense that they gave me a key to get in and out when I wanted to. And so I was in there literally from like 9 a.m. to like midnight. I was in love with it. And then my internship was over. I went back to college to finish up my last, I think I was like maybe one more semester before graduating. And I had just got bit by the radio bug. I'm like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And there were still no conversations with God. There was no prayer about it that I can remember. It was just, I felt like I was in my element. Mm-hmm. I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. And unspoken, God had wanted me to be there.
What was your relationship with God like at that point? Were you, I don't know, did you feel like you were close to him? Was he a priority? He'd obviously been a big part of your life growing up, but now you're kind of on your own.
You know, I can't say that I had a deep relationship with God. I knew God. I knew the Bible, but I feel like I was on my own. I wasn't like tied down by my family and going to church every Sunday and going to this meeting and that meeting, that I was free finally, almost in a sense. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm the only child. I have my mom and my dad, and I'm free like a bird. I can do what I want to do and nothing can touch me. So I don't think I had a really deep relationship with God. I knew God, but I don't know if we really had a relationship at that time. Mm-hmm. And so when I went back to school, and my priority when I got back to school was to find another radio station that I can intern at. And so I started to apply for different radio stations within that market. So I'm in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The closest station to me was about 30 minutes away in a city called Greensboro. I didn't apply to that station for some reason. I applied to a station that was 2.5 hours from me. I ended up applying to this station in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I sent my manila envelope with my CD, and I wrote my name on it, and I was excited, and I did the same thing. I kept calling the PD every day. His name was Uzi D. And so I called him every day, and one day he finally picked up the phone. And when he answered the phone, I remember saying, "Hey, it's me, Nikki." And he was like, "Are you the girl that keeps calling me and bothering me every day about this little manila envelope?" "Yeah, I threw it in the trash." And I was like, "You did?" Like, I was so hurt. And then he's like, "I'm kidding, okay? I'm kidding." Radio.
Oh, wow.
And so he's like, "Why do you want to intern here? Do you know how far that is to drive every day?" And I was like, I don't care. I just want an internship. He tells me, "I really love your persistence. I have some friends at a station in Greensboro." I said, "Okay, do you have a name? Like, who do I talk to?" And he gave me the name of a guy. His name was Rob. And he said, "Call Rob, tell him Uzi D referred you, and go from there." And so I ended up calling Rob, and he answered the phone. And I said, "Hey, Uzi D told me to call you, and I need an internship at the radio station. I work really hard, and, you know, I go to school and such and such." He was like, yeah, just come in Monday. So I went in Monday. And then I met Rob, and he did the same thing that Cece did. He said, "I got a lot of work to do, but I'm going to put you in this production room. Do you know how to produce a commercial?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." I had no idea still how to properly produce a commercial. But I said, "Yeah, sure, I can do it." I just had a lot of confidence, and yeah, I can do it. And he's like, "Well, I'm going to put you in this room, produce a commercial, and I'll listen to it, and then I'll decide whether or not you get the internship or not." So I produced the commercial, and he listened to it and said, "Okay, it's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. Come back next week and start your internship." Oh my goodness. I was just like, you couldn't tell me anything. I thought I was like, oh, this is it. Like, I got in at this radio station. I'm at the biggest hip hop station in Greensboro. Oh, I am it. You can't tell me anything. And so I started working at this station as an intern, and I was sitting there. I was there again all day from like 9 a.m. to midnight. And so as I'm sitting there one night, the night personality, he comes in, and he's like, "Man, I see you here all the time. What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm just producing, you know, learning commercials." And he's like, "Man, come and get on my show with me and do the news. Let's just try it out and see how you sound." So he put me on his show at night. He was like the production guru. Like, he was in charge of all the imaging for the station. And so he started to show me the imaging aspects of how to do sweepers for the station. And, you know, if you listen to the radio station, you'll hear a song and then you'll hear something like WGBL 95, whatever it is, that's a sweeper. And so he had me produce those. And after that, I started kind of looking at my situation and I saw that I had something special inside of me. And I'm like, you know, if I really want to be the greatest in my craft, I'm going to have to leave this station eventually. And I'm going to have to take that step of faith and just leave. Because when I looked around, everybody that was in a seat had been there for 10, 15, 20 years. And I'm like, they're not leaving. They're going to have to get fired before they leave. I can either stay here and wait for that to happen, or I can just go out and write my own story.
Wow. And at this point, I mean, things are going really well for you. You're getting to do what you love. You're passionate about it. You're good at it. So there's not a lot of reason to like have to lean on God, because it feels like there's just this force like moving you right along.
Very accurate. In the midst of that, I had got another boyfriend. It's just, I think the only child in me just doesn't want to be alone at this point in my life. And so I had started to apply again to different stations. And I had confidence through the roof. I was applying to stations in New York, in Florida, in Miami. I'm just thinking I'm just everything, in LA. And I ended up in New Bern, North Carolina, which is probably smaller than where I grew up in. And I applied for a midday position. And so I was a bit rough around the edges. I was a bit over the top when I was on the radio. I said things that most people would probably cringe at. And I was like the Howard Stern of hip hop radio. And so I applied to this job in New Bern, North Carolina, among many jobs. It took a while, maybe 4 months. And so this guy calls me up, and his name was J. Dot. And he says, hey, I know you applied for the midday position, but the midday girl decided not to leave. But the night position is open. Would you be open to doing nights? And I said, yeah. And he's like, okay, well, let me figure some things out. And the general manager at the time didn't want to hire me because I was too risky.
Because you were young or new or what?
Well, when they heard my air check, it was a bit out there. It was
You literally had the Howard Stern-ish.
Yeah, it was a bit out there. And so New Bern was considered the Bible Belt of the Carolinas.
Okay.
They were very hesitant on hiring me, but J-Dot really fought for me and was like, no, we need her energy. We need this. She's young. This is her first full-time job on radio. We need her. And I got the night position. I remember getting that night position and just feeling like I never wanted to leave. I never want to do anything else. I'm pretty sure by this time I was having those conversations like, God, this is so good. This is so good. Now, if you can just get this guy out of my life so I could really do what I need to do. Like, where did he come from? How did we get into this relationship? You know, the rebound thing when you break up and find somebody really quick that you really don't want to be with. It was that situation. And so he was another one that kind of held me back from being my best self. And I recognized it because I had recognized it in my last relationship. I'm at this station in New Bern and I get a phone call on the request line, maybe like 2 months after being there. And it's a PD from another station. And my PD happened to be in the studio with me. A PD is a program director. So basically your boss, your manager. And so I'm answering the phone calls and he's like, hey, is this Nikki? And I'm like, yeah. And so my PD is standing behind me. He's like, don't tell him I'm in here. And he's like, hey, my name is B. Pays. Man, you sound really great on the radio. I have this friend that may be looking for some talent soon. And I think you would be great. And mind you, I'm only like a month or two into this new gig. And I'm like, okay, well, let me get your information and, we can keep in contact. Fast forward about a year later, actually exactly to a year, I quit.
What made you decide to do that?
One reason is because my PD, he had got fired. It was around Christmas because he had just had his baby. And I remember thinking, man, how do you fire somebody that just had a kid right before Christmas? Like, that says a lot about this company. It's like when you lose your PD, a good boss, it kind of just trickles down and the atmosphere isn't really that good anymore. So I ended up leaving probably about 4 or 5 months later, which would have made it exactly a year. The guy that called me on the request line, I had been talking to his friend, the other PD, another one. I got a lot of PDs in my life. His name was J Tech, and J Tech had just gotten a PD position in Augusta, Georgia. And it was a family-owned station. I came on board as the midday personality. And this is where me and God started to have a very, very deep relationship.
What happened and what caused that?
It was a very toxic work environment.
Oh.
And it had me rethinking, did I even want to be in radio anymore? The PD, J-Tech, we're still like best friends to this day. He was great. But the owner that I worked for was very rude. I remember one time I was on the radio and we would read liners about, a club. Hey, check out this new club that's coming to the city. It was on the computer, on the screen, that I had to read it during my show. And so I'm reading this, and as I'm reading it, she literally kicks the door open and screams on me while I'm on the air and just goes off in this like rant about why am I reading it? And I'm literally on the air and I'm just sitting there like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I've never worked at a situation like this. Is insane. This lady is going crazy. I get off the air and I call my PD who's at lunch and I'm like, you've got to get back here. Like, I don't know if I'm living in like a time warps or something. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, if she's having a bad day. So he comes back and she's the one that put it in the system for us to read and she forgot. And so not one time did she apologize. And it kind of reminded me of Michael Scott from The Office. She would just call random meetings while you're on the air because she wanted to talk about stuff. Meeting now. I'm on the air. What is going on? And It got to the point where it was so bad that I just walked off on the air one day and I went outside and I called my mom and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. She followed me outside while I'm talking on the phone. And my mom was like, is that her? I'm like, that's her. It got so bad to the point where they fired J-Tech. So now I'm again in a situation with no PD, no hope, really.
So how old would you be? You're a couple years out of college?
I was 23, 24 maybe.
Yeah, so still very young. And so were you losing your love for radio and for what you were doing? Or
I still had a love for radio, but working there made me question, did I really love radio the way that I said I did? Because it was a real test. It was a test of my faith, a test of my strength, a test of my character, because I knew what I brought to the station. And if all these people saw what I brought to the station and you don't see this lady, then I don't know what to tell you. So before I went into work, every morning I would sit in the car and I would pray. And I would just say, God, give me the strength, give me the courage to face anything that I have to face in this building. There are still good people that I work with in this building. And I just prayed for her. So God just helped me to give this lady grace as much as I can. It was just really bad. And so I was really at my end. Like I was ready to quit. Lo and behold, God always sends a ram in the bush. As I'm praying, I remember it was close to my birthday. And I was just like, God, you either got to get me out of here or I'm going to leave. I don't know what to do. I really don't. Because at that time, no one was calling me to hire me. There were no prospects out there. Nothing was looking good. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. And so J-Dot, my PD from New Bern, calls me. And he says, hey, what you up to? And I'm like, about to cuss this lady out. And so, I'm just being real. I'm being real. That's all I know how to do. I said, well, I'm about to spaz, J-Dot. Like, I'm going through it. And he says, well, I got a call today. And one of my friends from Raleigh, North Carolina, which was a huge radio market, he says, one of my friends called me and asked me if I wanted to be the production manager for 3 stations in that market. And I was like, are you going to take it? He was like, well, I thought you should take it. And I said, me? He was like, man, production in and out. And to be honest with you, when I was working at my first internship, I had kind of set the goal to one day be a production manager. That was my goal. It wasn't to be on the radio. It wasn't to have my own show. It was to be a production manager. And so when he calls me with this, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. He was like, send me some of your work. I'm going to send it to the PD. We can go from there. And I said, okay, cool. So that was on my birthday, literally on my birthday. About a couple of weeks later, that PD hit me and says, man, your production sounds great. Did you do it or did a guy do it? I was like, you're kidding, right? Like, did you really just say that? I'm like, I did it. What do you mean did a guy do it? The guys aren't the only ones that know how to produce. He's like, okay, well, go to the website and look at our lineup and produce a 60-second promo and send it to me. So I had to do a promo that talked about who was on at middays, what their segments were on their show. So this is like a commercial to advertise the guys that work at the station. And so I produced this promo and he says, okay, nice. I'll be in touch. That was it. I did not want to wait. This was like October. He called me probably 2 weeks before Christmas. And I haven't heard from him since October. Calls me 2 weeks before Christmas and says, can you start December 21st? Out of nowhere. Yeah. And at the time, it's like God gave me double blessings because I had been praying to get out of my relationship at the time also. It wasn't time for me to be in a relationship. And so I'm like, man, if I move back to Raleigh, which is an hour from my parents' house, I can live with my mom and dad for a while, get this guy out of my life, and still have my dream job. I'm winning right now. And so I ended up putting it was so funny because anybody that quit that station where the toxic lady was at, they would put their 2-week notice in and she would kick them out the same day. That's how bad it was. Like she would literally put their stuff in a box and sit it outside the door. And so when I put my 2-week notice in, she didn't tell me to leave right away. But then I went back to the studio and I sat there and I said, I'm leaving. I'm not staying here. I would be a fool to stay here. I'm not going to stay in Egypt. I am getting out of this wilderness now. I am not about to sit here. And I left.
What were your conversations with God like in that season, that waiting season? Because you'd started talking to him more. You were more reliant on him. What was happening in your relationship with God?
I had just started reading more. I had started picking up prayer journals. I remember I was reading a book by Juanita Bynum, and it was called No More Sheets. And it basically talked about saving yourself for God and not being in a relationship. And so my boyfriend at the time was really upset that I was reading that book. And he's like, why do you keep reading all these books? Like, you're just messing up our relationship. And I'm like, no, I'm still not understanding what I'm doing. But I'm like, no, this makes me feel good. I need this in my life. I've had a void for so long, and I feel that void with partying and drinking and smoking and getting into these relationships that are not worth my time. I need whatever I'm getting right now, and you should be happy for me. And so that's what my life was. I had just started reading more. I had started exercising. In that waiting period, I'm just like, okay, God, I know that I'm supposed to have this job. I've always wanted to work at this station in Raleigh. I'm going to be patient. I'm not just going to walk out until you give me the word. So I moved back home with my mom and dad I moved in December, January, February, March. So I stayed with them until May. And then I moved into my apartment. And I remember the day that I moved in, a friend had asked me to come to her listening party. So I go to this listening party, and there's a guy standing in front of me who I used to have the biggest crush on. He turns around and he's like, oh, wow, where have you been? And I'm like, I just moved back. Where have you been with your little cute self? We go in the club and we end up talking all night. I knew him from being an artist. He was an independent artist when I was working at my second internship. After that night at the club, I was like, man, he's everything I thought he would be like. And so I started like calling him and reaching out to him. And he came over to the house one time to eat dinner. And I said, so let's talk. What's been up with you? And he says, well, I'm really on this spiritual journey with God. I said, really? How's that working out? Because at the time I was still deep in my relationship with God, not as deep as I thought I was now that I look back, but I was skating. And so he's like, I just want to let you know that I'm not trying to have like a real relationship with you because I'm in a relationship with God. I thought this is about to be my husband. I told him like the first week, I said, we're getting married, right? And I'm going to have all your kids, right? And so he thought I was crazy. And I think he didn't call me for a while because I said that, because he didn't think I was crazy. But I thought, wow, the more that I was around him, I wanted to know more about his relationship with God. And how do I get some of that? I want that relationship. I want that feeling of peace and happiness and joy. I want to feel that. I know God, and I know he's here for me, and I know I prayed, and he brought me to this city, and maybe he brought me to this city to meet you.
What did you see in him that was different?
I saw peace. I didn't see a lot of chaos. I didn't see a lot of him being distracted by certain things. Because, back in the day, I was looking real good. So I'm like, why doesn't he want to be with me? I'm the total package. Why would you not want to be with me? Like, it's got to be God. So at the time, he was still an artist. He was a traveling artist. He had sold 500,000 copies of his CD hand to hand out of the trunk of his car. He was by himself most of the time, and he would travel to different flea markets or pop-up shops, and he would sell his music. And I saw how much peace he had. I'm like, you're out, you're making money, you're talking to people, and you just seem so happy. Like, you're just at peace. And I would see him come over to the house, and he would just sit and meditate for an hour or 2 hours. Like, you want to go get something to eat? No, I'm fasting this week. Fasting from food? Are you crazy? So I would see all these things. And the more I was around my husband, my boyfriend, or not even boyfriend at the time, my friend, the more I was around him, the more I wanted to know God. The more I wanted to experience that peace. The more I wanted to not worry about what the world thought about me, or if I was doing something right or doing something wrong, or worried if I was going to be judged for something I said or didn't say. And so I started to listen to Joyce Meyer a lot. And every morning I would wake up and I would watch her on TV. I would buy her audiobooks. My mom was buying me journals with Joyce Meyer, Battlefield of the Mind. And I was just into it. I was reading, I was studying, I was asking questions. I was trying to find a church in the city that I could be a part of. And it was just like a 360 for me. I started to really think about, man, I'm working at this hip hop station and I'm promoting women, exploiting themselves. I'm promoting men selling drugs. I'm promoting violence. I'm promoting all of this to the masses. And even though I'm not the one that's programming the music or rapping or singing the music, I'm the voice behind it. And so I started to really question myself, like, do I want to do this? I remember one day I was in the club and I was hosting a party. On one side, it's kind of like the devil on one side and the angel sitting on your shoulder. And I'm sitting there with the mic in my hand telling people hey, hit the bar, let's get drunk tonight, let's party. And then on the other side, I'm reading my Bible app on my phone. And the bartenders would even walk up to me before the party started, like, what do you do over here when you're sitting here reading your phone? And I'm like, I'm reading Bible scriptures, to the point where 2 of them ended up quitting because they started thinking about their life like, well, what am I doing here? I shouldn't be bartending. And so I just started to see the ripple effect that God had, not only in my life, but in other people's lives, and how it started with my husband and then me, and then people around me started to change.
God had been changing Nikki, and now the career that she'd once been so passionate about, so sure it was the calling on her life, it no longer fit. She couldn't keep doing what she was doing, but how could she walk away?
So one day I had a conversation with God and I said, God, I'm tired of promoting negative stuff. I'm tired of being the spokesperson of negativity, and I want to do something positive. God spoke to me and just said TV show. And that's all I heard was TV show. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Because, we want God to give us the details, but sometimes God doesn't give us the details. My husband likes to say faith doesn't give us all the details, because if we had the details, we would not go through with it. And so I heard TV show and I told my husband about it, and he was like, well, what do you think it means? I was like, I don't know. I said, maybe I should create a TV show about positive things. And so we came up with the name and everything, and I turned my 2-week notice in. They offered me more money. They offered me more people in the department to help me. And I was at the point in my life where I'm like, that's a distraction. So I quit. They were pretty mad, pretty sad. People didn't understand. And this was in 2013. So I was probably about 27, 28 maybe. I was getting married the same year that I quit my job.
Wait, how did you guys go from just hanging out to...
He just said the way that I was accepting of him, the way that he saw me changing and wanting to be a better woman. And he had never really had a relationship like that before. Kind of the same for both of us. I had never had a relationship where the guy was into God more than me. And he just saw the change. We met 2010. We were married in 2013. I quit my job in May of 2013. And this was before it was popular to quit jobs. And so my mom didn't talk to me for like a month. That was hard because people were asking me why. And I'm just like, I'm following God. And when you say that, people are like, you doing what? What about your benefits? What about your money? How are you going to make money? How are you going to eat? How are you going to survive? I'm just following God. I don't know how. I don't know when. I don't know why. I'm just following God and I'm being obedient.
What a big transformation from, I think about you like in college, and you were so driven. You were going to make it happen. And to be able to come to a place where you're willing to open up your hands and just say, I'm following you and I don't even know where it's going. Did you have more peace at that point than you did when you were so driven and you thought you knew where you were going?
Oh my goodness. It was the roughest time in my life, but I was closer to God than I had ever been before. It was just like, man, when you talk about trusting God, I had to really trust God because when I quit, I didn't have any money saved up. I might have had a couple of rent payments. I didn't have anything saved up. We literally, to our name, when I quit my job, my husband was like, well, let's go on the road together. Let's do this thing together. I'll show you how to sell. And so the TV show came back into play and we literally had $500 to our name. That's it. We had a wedding coming up. My mom was mad. She's like, why didn't you pay for the wedding before you quit your job? You don't think that would have been smart? I wasn't thinking. And so we had $500 to our name and we went to Best Buy and bought a camera. Neither one of us knew how to operate a camera. We didn't know how to edit. We didn't know how to shoot video. So we bought this camera and we started to go out and shoot entrepreneurs that had their own business and just get their story. We called the show for Dreamers Only. We interviewed maybe like 3 or 4 people for the first episode. And my husband learned how to edit. He learned how to shoot. And we put all of these stories together on a DVD and we pressed up like 500 copies. In the midst of me doing the TV show, he decided to write a book because the music wasn't reflective of who he was becoming in God. And so he wrote a book called From Poverty to Prosperity. I had a TV show called For Dreamers Only. We pressed up 500 copies of each of these. We packed up our apartment, put everything in storage. We had a Chevy Impala that my dad put in his name. We promised to pay the bill every month, which we did. I had a suitcase, he had a suitcase, and we had a desktop Mac computer. And we stuffed all of this stuff inside of a Chevy Impala, and we just started driving. So my husband knew this guy who would get into malls. You ever been to the mall and you see the people in the kiosk in the booth and they tell you to come get your hair straightened or whatever? He had a guy that was his job, was to set people up in the mall to do these tours. So the tours would be 10 days and then you would break and then you would go to the next city for 10 days. So we got on his tour and we traveled with all these people that were like in their 60s and 70s selling bracelets and just fun stuff. We would travel with them. And we would get into these malls and we would have enough money to pay for our booth rent. And we would stand in the mall for 10 hours for 10 days, every day, Monday through Sunday. Sometimes the malls would be great. Sometimes the malls would be terrible. And I would do my pitch. Hey, I'm your girl, Nikki. I created a positive TV show called For Dreamers Only where we showcase entrepreneurs and tell their stories. Would you like to buy a copy for $10? My husband is here. He wrote a book, From Poverty to Prosperity. That's $10. You can get both for $20. And people would just give us $20 bills all day.
Oh my goodness. You're literally like living day by day by faith.
Oh, honey, hour by hour, not day by day. It was real. And we were staying in hotels. We were taking all of our stuff, getting hotel rooms, extended stays. Not like the Hilton or the Marriott. It's like put bars on the door just to make sure you're okay. My mom was totally against it. She's like, I don't know what you were doing. This is crazy. You had a good job. You should have stayed. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. Didn't. I didn't, Mom. I'm following God. I don't know where I'm going, but I've met some pretty amazing people along this journey, and I wouldn't take it back for anything. And we were just doing this. We did this for 2 years, and that was our life. It's like every city that we went to was just a step of faith toward the next journey that God had planned for us, the next chapter that God had written out for us. It was just things that would happen that we knew that God had his hand in. Like, I remember one time we were so broke and we were like, how are we going to get into this mall? Like, we've already signed the contract and we haven't given them the money yet. And so we get to this mall and the guy is like, oh man, just pay me when you are finished. Just pay me at the end of the weekend. No worries. No rush. And we would just meet people along the journey. It seems a little crazy now, but people that would invite us into their homes to spend the night so we didn't have to spend money in a hotel. And people are like, you stayed with people you didn't know? The disciples did it. You trust. You just trust. You have an unspoken trust. We were beside this one guy. His name was Shaha, and he was from Israel, but he had a booth beside us, and he let us stay in his home for 2 weeks. I cooked, and he let us stay there, and we had the greatest relationship. It was just so many people along the journey that we met that let us know that God had his hand on us and that we were okay, regardless of what other people think, because people are always going to have an opinion, a say-so on what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, but you got to trust God.
I assume by the end of that 2 years, you had a pretty high confidence level that God was, wherever he led you, he was going to take care of you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It never stopped. To this day, it hasn't stopped. Like every time I go somewhere, I just know that I'm supposed to be there. So after these 2 years were over, my husband and I, we sat in the hotel room, our last hotel room, and my husband looked at me and said, you know what? I think God is saying this is it. And it's time for us to find the place and just settle down for a minute. I said, okay, I'm with that. So we went back to Greensboro, and the station that I had worked at before wanted me to do mornings. And I was like, okay, I had not worked in full-time radio for 2 years. I don't think I really wanted to go back yet because I felt so free. It was just a peace and a freedom from the world and all of this garbage that I just couldn't explain, that I just didn't want to go back. And I did go back to audition. And about 2 weeks later, I turned it down. I said, I can't do this. I'm not going to compromise how far I've come. I'm not going to compromise my beliefs for some money. I'm just not going to do it. I know God is going to have my back. The guy that had put me on the air for the first time in Greensboro, he had left and he was living in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Me and my husband were looking on Craigslist, which I don't think people look there anymore. We had been living with his aunt for like 2 or 3 weeks, which she loved. She enjoyed it, but we knew we had to leave. So we were looking at Craigslist one day and we found an extended stay hotel for $500 a month, which was really unheard of because we had been on the road paying $500 for a weekend just for a hotel. So I'm like, this has got to be God. And so I'm like, where is it at? He's like, it's in Fayetteville. And I'm like, really? And so I called the guy. His name is Tap Money. He's the one that put me on the air for the first time at 102. And so I called him and I said, hey, are y'all hiring at the station? Because I'm basically living in Fayetteville now. And I want to come back, but I only want to do part-time. I don't want to be on full-time. He was like, sure, come back. And so as I'm working in Fayetteville, I'm on cloud nine. I'm just feeling good about life. I'm like, man, we did the road. It was amazing. It was rough. You know, it was days that I didn't know we were going to make it, but we're here. And I'm just so excited about where we are. I'm part-time at the station. They don't have all my time, which is amazing. And then I started to feel the radio bug really biting me to get back in full time. And I felt kind of weird about doing radio in Fayetteville because it was a hip hop station and I had once left that alone. And I think this is kind of where I kind of made my own decision to get back into radio, and I didn't too much consult God. I felt like he had his hand on me. So whatever I did, then I would be okay. That's not really the best way to think, but that's just how I thought at the time. And so a job came open in Fayetteville for a station in Charlotte. It was within the same company. I think the money was getting to me. We were off the road and we weren't making money like we were. And we didn't know what to do. We didn't know where God was really leading us. We just knew he said, come off the road. And so a job opened up in Charlotte, and the PD was Uzi D, the guy that I met when I first got into radio. And so I called him and I said, hey, I see you got a job opening. What's up with it? And he was like, are you going to quit? Because I know you. If you're not happy, you're going to quit. And I said, is that the reputation I have now, that I'm going to quit? He was like, it's not a bad thing, but it could be a bad thing when you're coming to work for someone. And so he said, if I decide to hire you, you got to at least give me 2 years. And I said, I can do that. I'll give you 2 years. And I had my daughter in the midst of that. And so my daughter was born in 2018. And after I had my daughter, I started rethinking life again. I started feeling that tug on my heart that it was time to get out of this thing for good. I still was like, well, God, I'm at the top of my game. Like, I'm like the it girl. Like, I'm trying to kind of like, I'm in the community. I have these girls that I mentor. I have this book club that people donate books to so we could feed the book deserts. And I'm doing this homeless initiative in the streets. Like, why should I leave now? There was no reason why. You just said to go. And God started giving me signs. And I tell people the calling doesn't get quieter, it gets louder.
Do you remember any of those signs that he gave you?
Oh, I was just talking about this today to someone. So I remember having a dream. And in that dream, there was the studio that I worked in. There was this huge window that you could look out and just see the road. You could see the streets. I remember in the dream, I was looking out this window and I see this huge tornado coming toward the window. And I'm like screaming like, oh my gosh, do you see this tornado? And literally everybody that worked there was like in zombie mode. They couldn't see it. And I'm like, you don't see the destruction that's coming towards us if we keep doing this? We're just feeding the community with violence and sex and drugs, and it's coming towards us. You don't see this? And everybody's just like a robot. And so I had that dream, and literally like a month later, I was on Instagram and I was looking at one of my coworkers' stories, and she was standing in front of that window, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, do you guys see this storm coming? It's like headed right toward the station. It almost looks like a tornado." And I was just like, no way. I'm like, this is really God. And so I started to write my 2-week notice out, probably October of that year. Every month I would change the date because I was scared because I have this daughter now. I have insurance. I'm not as, go get it faithful as I was in 2013 when I just had me and my husband. I got a responsibility now, and I have to make sure that I make the right decision. That 2-week notice went from October to February of 2020, and I finally turned my notice in. We ask God for a sign, and he gives us a sign, and then we say, well, give me another one and another one. And can this person wearing a green shirt walk up to me at 3 p.m. today and say, the Lord told me to tell you to go? Yeah. It doesn't work like that. If God has already given you the word, that's the word. That's it. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. If you don't listen, God's going to keep getting louder and louder and louder and louder. The day that I decided to turn my 2-week notice in, I was still like, God, just give me one sign. I got to feel good about this. And so I was on the phone with a friend, and we're talking. She had just quit radio maybe like a month or two ago, and we were talking. And I was like, yeah, I think today is the day. I don't know, though. I think today's the day. I'm scared. And I was looking out the window, and I said, man, I didn't know it was supposed to snow today. And she says, it's not supposed to snow today. And I said, today's the day. I went to work, and as soon as I got to work, the fire alarm went off, and everybody had to be evacuated out the building. And I said, this is just a sign. This is like, God is like, okay, here's double signs. Do you get it now? And so I turned in my 2-week notice, and my PD had left for the day. It was a Friday, and he had left already. And I said, well, God, he's already gone. Slide it under his door. He'll get it. So I slid it under the door. I literally quit 3 weeks before the whole world shut down, and everybody from the radio station got to work from home. So imagine my face when I'm just looking like, really, God? I could have worked from home. But then I felt the Spirit kind of nudge me and say, would you want to bring this into your home? You didn't want to deal with it in a studio. What makes you think that you're going to deal with it at your home where you have peace at? I kind of felt that I knew what was next. I didn't know the pandemic was about to hit when I quit. People were talking about COVID, but it wasn't a thing yet. And so my husband, we had talked about it, and he said, if you're comfortable with quitting, I'm down. He was managing an R&B group at the time, and they were traveling a lot. And so he's like, if you want to stay home with Bella and I'll hold down the fort, we can do that. My plan was to be a stay-at-home mom and still do events on the side, but events that cater to the things of the Spirit, things that I really enjoy doing. And so when COVID hit, it shut all of that down. My husband lost his managing job because they couldn't travel anymore. I couldn't do any events, and it was just us three in the house. I started doing voiceovers and making enough money so that we could survive. We were only late on our rent once. And when I quit this job, I didn't have a bunch of money saved. We were late on our rent 1 month, and my mom, we were blessed to have her help us out for that month, and we gave her the money right back. And then at the end of December, I got a call from someone in the industry, and they knew what I could do on social media because I had done it for my husband's group. And they asked me to work with their artist and do social media marketing. And I was like, woo, that's a blessing, because I was now pregnant with my son. I had plans, but as we know, God has his plans. We have our vision board, and God has his vision board. And a lot of times we don't ask God what's his vision for our life. We just say, God, look at my vision board. You see this car, you see this house, you see this money I want in my account this year. This is my vision board. And God is literally ripping that vision board up and saying, we're rewriting all of that. We're rewriting all of that vision board. That's in the trash. That's a trash board. That's not a vision board. God has the real vision board. During that time that I was sitting still and I was promoting my voiceovers, I kept hearing God tell me to pray. Not just pray for myself, but pray for other people. So I started prayer online on IG, on Instagram, and we prayed every week. We did Bible study every week. I had no idea why he wanted me to pray or why he wanted me to corporately fast with people, but it changed so many people's lives. I was just happy to be that empty vessel. And that's what God is looking for. He's looking for a willing spirit. He's just looking for one person to say yes, and he'll do the rest. And so I just started praying, and I started doing midnight prayer calls and it just exploded. I remember one time, one of the girls I had worked with in hip hop wanted me to pray for her friends. When I prayed on Instagram, I would cut the lights off. I didn't want people looking at me. And she's like, I want you to pray for some of my friends on Zoom. And I said, okay. And so I get on Zoom and it's 60 people. And I looked and I said, you gotta be kidding me, Jessica. Why would you do this? She's like, surprise, these are all my friends. I'm like, oh my gosh. And it just put me on the spot. But I felt so good. I felt like I was doing what God had called me to do. Mm-hmm. That was part of my purpose, was praying and giving people hope. And I said, God, one day I want to get back into radio. And I wrote down kind of how I was feeling during that time. And I was like, I would love to work at a station where I can help people and give them hope. And I love praying for people. I don't know how you're going to use this, but I trust you. I've always trusted you. You've never let me down. In December of 2022, I went on a 2-week water fast. I didn't eat any food because I was kind of struggling. I had my son had been born. My daughter was going on 4. My son was a newborn. And I was feeling the urge to get back into radio again. And I'm like, man, this radio thing won't let me go. What is going on? And so I was about to compromise and just go back into the wilderness, go back to the station I had just left because I was still in the city. I had been calling like, hey, do y'all need any help? I'll work for free. I was willing to go back to the wilderness, work for free, knowing I didn't need to be there. It was like, I just need to fast. I just need to get rid of the distractions, get rid of the world, and just fast and pray and set my face toward God because I don't know what I'm doing. And so I fasted for 2 weeks. I had 2 questions during that fast. I said, God, should I get back into radio, and where should my family plant their roots at? Because our lease was about to be up. We didn't know if we wanted to buy something in North Carolina or what. And so those were my 2 questions. And so a week after that fast, J-Bo, who was a morning show host here at Boost Radio, she calls me. And the story about J-Bo is J-Bo introduced herself to me in 2020 when I quit. And she saw the post that I made on Instagram just talking about, I'm leaving radio. I'm not looking back. I'm following God. Whatever he has for me, I don't know, but I'm going. And she reached out to me and said, I don't know you, but I love what you said in your post. And it just really inspired me. And I said, okay, cool. Let's keep in touch. In 2023, actually, she called me the first week of January and said, hey, I don't know what you got going on, but I'm about to leave the station that I'm at, and I think you would be perfect. I think you have exactly what it takes to work here. And I said, okay, cool. My aunt had just passed, and we were on the way to the funeral. And I was like, well, I'll check it out. I didn't really think much about it. And so she hit me back another week and said, did you reach out to anyone? And I said, no. I was like, where do you live at anyway? Like, I'm not really trying to leave North Carolina. She said, well, I live in Missouri. And I said, yeah, I'm not moving to Missouri. I'm just not. I'm like, that was my first response. I'm not moving to no Missouri. I don't even know what's up there. I'm not leaving my family. You crazy? She's like, I think you would really be perfect. And I said, yeah, I don't know. And so my husband said, didn't you just not eat for 2 weeks for this answer? And I said, you're right, but I'm not moving to Missouri. So maybe it's something else. And then I prayed about it. And it's almost like God was telling me, what if this is the only door that I have for you? What if you don't walk through this door and I don't have anything else for you? Are you going to miss your blessing or your opportunity just because you don't want to move? Because you're comfortable, because you're stuck in your situation? You prayed for this. And so I ended up hitting Mike Couchman and I talked to him. He interviewed me and I told him, I said, I have reservations about moving so far away. And so after I started listening to Boost more and just hearing it, and I'm like, this is exactly what I prayed for. Like, this is hip hop, but it's Christian hip hop. And I can still be myself. I don't have to change. And I was like, I think I want to do this. And I talked to my husband again about it. And he says, I'm with it. Whatever you want to do, I'm rolling with you 100%. So I had another interview with Sandy Brown, who is the owner of Joy FM and Boost Radio. We just had a really great conversation. And they flew me and my husband out to meet us. And that really spoke a lot to me because most stations that I work for, they don't want you to have a relationship. They don't want you to have kids because it's just like, oh, it's just going to take you away from the job. But they were excited to meet Brandon. And so I was excited for them to meet Brandon and to know our kids. And it just worked out. It was just like God sent. And I said, I know this is from you, God. And there have been days, I've been here now in St. Louis working at Boost for about 9 or 10 months. And there have been days where it's been overwhelming because we are without our family and our support system. But every now and then, God just sends a ram in the bush, gives us a break we need, or just gives us revelation or confirmation that we're on the right track. And I know I talked to my therapist last week, and she asked me, how did I feel? And I said, well, I'm tired, I'm sleepy, I'm overwhelmed. Some days I'm frustrated, but I'm hopeful because I know that I'm supposed to be here. There's no doubt in my mind that I am where I'm supposed to be, that this was in the plans when I left radio back in 2013. And here we are 10 years later, and I know that God promised me that I would be here one day. And a lot of people, when God tells them something or gives them a vision, they think it's supposed to happen that day or that hour or even that year. And it doesn't sometimes. Sometimes you have to wait. Sometimes you have to be prepared and go through the wilderness. So me praying and quitting my second job and praying for people online and doing Bible study, it brought me to the point where I could be able to do the same thing for people on this station.
I think as you're sharing your story, I just think about people who are afraid. They're in the wilderness and they're afraid to step into the promised land because God often, or maybe not often, almost always, he does not give us the end. He just gives us the next step. And it's hard. What words of wisdom would you share with somebody?
The first thing I would say is to fast. It doesn't have to be 2 weeks, but at least show God your sacrifice. Fast a day. Fast from something that you really, 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 really love so that you can sit with God in stillness and just find out exactly, God, what do you want me to do? So I would pray about it. If you're married, I would pray about it with your spouse. Have them fast with you so that you both have revelation from God. And once you get that revelation, move. Put one foot in front of the other. It's always going to be scary. It was scary to move here. It was scary to quit. But if I hadn't done it, I don't know that my life will be where it is right now. I would pray about it, get the revelation from God, and then do exactly what God is telling you to do. You know, we create all these excuses. Well, God, I don't have the money. Well, God, I'm in this lease. Well, God, I have my kids. Well, God is God. God is going to be God, and he's going to have your back regardless of all those. He knows your circumstance. He gave you those kids. He gave you that husband, that wife. He gave it to you. He knows what you're going through. You just got to take that first step of faith. Faith is the size of a mustard seed. Have you ever seen a mustard seed? If you've never seen a mustard seed, I encourage you to go to the grocery store, get a jar of mustard seeds, and just open it up and put one in your hand and look at how small it is. If you drop a mustard seed on the ground, you won't be able to see it. God is asking you to have faith that small, and he'll do the rest.
It's obvious that you have a gift for praying for people. So I wonder if you'd be willing to pray for those who hear what you're saying. And there's like you know how sometimes you get that burning in your chest because you know that it's reading your mail. It's exactly where you are. Would you be willing to pray for the people in that position that they would be willing to follow God?
I would, yeah. Dear God, we come to you this morning, this day. We come to you and we just say thank you. We thank you for protecting us last night. We thank you for our families, our children, our health, and our strength. God, we thank you for your vision. God, help us to get rid of our plans. Help us to take your plans and go full force with what you have for us. God, right now, maybe someone is dealing with the anxiety or the panic of stepping out and following you. God, I pray that they know that you've already made the way, that you're already 10 steps ahead of them. As soon as they step out, you're going to catch them. God, I just break any type of strongholds that are on this person right now, any strongholds of depression, any strongholds of panic and anxiety, any strongholds that are holding them back from being who you have called them to be. Lord, you have called all of us to be great vessels in the kingdom. God, there's somebody on this line right now, God, and they want to say yes, God, but they're afraid to say yes because they don't know what that yes looks like. Does that yes look like I'm going to be broke? Does it look like I'm going to struggle? Stop worrying about what it looks like and look at God. Keep your eyes on God. Keep your eyes on the prize. Keep your eyes on the kingdom. Your blessing, your gifts, your talents have the power to unlock not just your dreams, but dreams of people around you. Just think about all the people that are suffering right now because you refuse to step out on your yes. I encourage you today to step out, to be bold, to be courageous, to stand firm in faith, to stand firm in the word of God, to know that he's got your back. And God says we do not have to live in fear. We can live in faith today. Today is the beginning of a new life for you. So step into what God has called you to be, and know that God has your back no matter what happens in this. He has your back. God just needs your yes. And once you take that step of faith, God will be there to meet you and hold your hand every step of the way. In Jesus' name, I pray, amen.
You can hear Nikki do what she loves every weekday from 5 to 10 a.m. Central on Boost Radio. They broadcast in St. Louis, Chicago, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh, Fayetteville, and Portland. They're also on the Boost Radio app or at boostradio.com. And you can also follow Nikki at YaGirlNikki, YaGirlNikki, on Facebook and Instagram. Huge thanks to Nikki for sharing her story. Thank you for listening, sharing these stories, for your kind reviews on your favorite podcast app, like this one from Apple Podcasts. I listen to this podcast every week. It inspires me, and at times I hear God speaking to me through the podcast. It gives me hope. Thanks for sharing that. When you share your reviews, it helps other people find this podcast, hear these stories, and find hope in Jesus too. Hey, if you'd like to help this kind of inspiring storytelling grow, you can support the Wow God Podcast Network. When you do, you allow us to create podcasts where every story gives listeners a chance to say, Wow God. You can make a monthly gift of $40 or a gift of any size at wowgod.com. Thanks to the Unfolding team, Michael Shermack, Lindsay Caparoon, our producer and network director, Jason Rackow. The Unfolding is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com. We'll be back next week with another page of The Unfolding.